It is BBC Radio Manchester. Joining the studio, I have Helen and also Hayley. And during today's Bad Parents Club Hour, we thought of talking about a really important subject for ADHD Awareness Month, and we want to learn more about it. I know I definitely do. Matthew Menzies set up ADHD Remapped in Northernden, Manchester, after he was diagnosed himself at the age of 39. So Matthew is here to tell us a bit more about Remapped, but also as well about his diagnosis. So hello to you, Matthew.
Hi, Simone. Thanks for having me.
Oh, no, absolute pleasure. So ADHD Awareness Month. So can you tell me what ADHD exactly is, please?
Yeah, sure. So if we look at the name ADHD, it stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. It's classified as a developmental disorder, and it comes in 3 different types, we call it. So you have hyperactive type, inattentive type, and then a combination of those two. Now that is really kind of in line with almost a medical model kind of description of what ADHD is, and doesn't really relate to the individual's experience. If you look at the attention deficit part of that name, so let's say we're talking to a child or a partner and you're calling their name, and from your point of view, you're thinking like they're just not listening, they're not paying attention. But actually, they're paying attention to everything in the room, every sound, every sight, every sensory kind of input, and it's very difficult to filter out your voice as one of those things. So it's not a deficit of attention, it's actually an abundance of attention that is quite difficult to filter.
That's really interesting, but how would you kind of, not diagnose it, but what signs would you look out for in children in particular? I want to know.
With children or adults can be very similar. Low attention in terms of tasks that are not interesting, impulsivity around behaviour, sometimes verbal, sometimes in action. Might be a kind of physical or verbal outburst. Emotional regulation is a very common symptom in ADHD, and that's again, kind of struggling to manage change or transition, and can create real emotional outbursts. But a lot of clients that I see, the kind of main problems they come to me with to resolve are around emotional overwhelm, struggling with things like kind of life management and organisation and timekeeping, and self-confidence is always a real big topic as well.
I think for me, Matthew, it's really good to speak to, because the misconception that I had, I remember when I was at school and it was people were talking about ADHD and what it was, but we always used to hear that it was craving attention. They're those type of people that are craving attention. And speaking to you, it's not like that. This is all a misconception, isn't it, of ADHD?
Absolutely, yeah. And, for decades we've kind of researched and studied misconceptions around ADHD, and that's where things like the assumption that girls are less impacted than boys comes in. And actually that's because we studied hyperactive boys for decades and thinking that was the kind of sole source of ADHD, but it's so much deeper than that.
Mm-hmm. Parents, Hayley and also Helen, have you got any questions that you'd like to put to Matthew?
Mike, I just had one question. It's Helen. Matthew, hello.
Hi, Helen. Hi.
When I've been working with children and observing behaviours, would you say that picking up on other children's or people's, adults, sort of social cues and emotional responses is harder for somebody who's struggling with their ADHD or has had a diagnosis?
Yeah, so there's this kind of statistic around a developmental delay in children with ADHD. They name it as around a 30% developmental delay, and it's not around intelligence. It tends to be around executive function in terms of kind of organisation and planning, and social development as well is significantly impacted. So that is definitely one thing that is a big kind of signal if socially the child isn't necessarily kind of in line with peers, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense, because if you're struggling to focus on an activity, even if it's something that you enjoy, then whatever the learning objective is out of that activity would be more difficult to achieve.
For you, Matthew, you were diagnosed late at the age of 39. Why do you think late diagnosis are becoming more common nowadays?
It's an interesting topic, and there's so many factors that come into that. if you, again, as I mentioned earlier about research around the hyperactive boy that couldn't sit still, that is just such a small portion of the ADHD experience. There's so much more awareness now, particularly around social media and kind of people speaking out on radio shows and TV. But for me, in the last few years, the main catalyst was actually COVID. And if we look at the kind of needs of, ADHD children and ADHD adults, we need structure, we need routine. But then also, because we have low dopamine, we also need novelty to provide that dopamine stimulus. And lockdown during COVID stripped all of this away. So I had a look at some NHS data recently, and if you look at the rise in ADHD diagnosis from, say, 2016 to 2020, there's quite a steady rise. And then after a small dip in the early stages of COVID, then there's quite a dramatic increase in diagnosis or actually known patients to the NHS. And, that's after months of confinement during lockdown. You're stripping away all of that routine and structure, and you're stripping away the opportunities to go and seek dopamine in positive ways. And so for me, I kind of ended up going into quite a severe mental health crisis, and I think that's been quite a common theme for a lot of people during that time. And I think that has been a big factor in driving diagnosis and people exploring help and support.
Yeah. If it's all right with you, Matthew, I'm just going to look and see what's happening on the roads and public transport and play a song, and then I'm going to come back to you because I've got loads of questions that I want to ask, and I know that the parents that are with me today have questions for you as well. So if that's okay, I'll be back with you in 2 ticks. We are going to be back with Matthew Menzies, who set up ADHD Remapped in Northernden after finding out that he was diagnosed himself at 39. But first, well, it is a Bad Parents Club today, and we have been taking a look at ADHD Awareness Month. We've learned some amazing stuff already about it from Matthew Menzies, who set up ADHD Remapped in Northernden. Now, Matthew is from Manchester, and he was diagnosed himself at the age of 39. Matthew, I do apologise because you're over the phone line, so you've not really been here to chat with the parents that I've got here, Helen and also Hayley. But we've got some amazing questions, I think, for you. I'm going to start off with Hayley. You mentioned something really positive during our chat there about the school system.
Well, I was. Hello, Matthew. By the way, hi. I was just.
Hi.
I was just saying everything that you described then. Is really tricky to hear because actually all of the kind of environments and scenarios that you talked about are absolutely the opposite to what our standard school system offers children.
Yeah.
And it's a bit frustrating to hear it, really, because I think we've got a long way to go, haven't we, before the system itself enables. So, like you said, the 30% in terms of developmental, delay, 100% of that could be made up should the correct environment and understanding of how children learn be put into place.
Which is what we do in early years all the time.
It's true. Helen's just said that, and she's right. So we're both early years specialists and an early years environment, so nurseries, schools. Part of what we do is often child-led. Yeah. So we, they're allowed to observe children and adapt to meet that child's needs. And actually, it's a government requirement that is what happens for children of the ages 0 to 5. So again, it's quite mind-blowing that then a child reaches 5 years old and then that all stops.
It's frustrating. Yeah. It's really frustrating.
As they move into Key Stage 1, then it's, so much kind of seated learning, isn't it, rather than kind of freedom of choice. Yeah. And I think, with schools and education, if you look at what well-behaved looks like in schools, sit still up to 6 hours a day, listen, be quiet, don't shout out, pay attention. All of these things they're contrary to the ADHD experience, and particularly with children, that ability to kind of like self-managing and controlling them situations is so tough. And I know there's a bigger emphasis on kind of positive behaviour management these days, but I see myself in my son's school continuous punishment of children who have ADHD, and it's absolutely devastating. Punishment with ADHD children does not work. Like, there's a reason you've been doing it for years and that child has not responded well. It actually can provide negative stimulus that is almost provides that dopamine boost, as I said earlier, that lack of dopamine in ADHD. And, you know, positive reinforcement is key. Like, just let's stop berating our ADHD children and let's start telling them how amazing they are, even the tiniest thing, and build from there.
Yeah. My last question to you, Matthew, is we have been speaking about children and signs that we need to kind of look out for. But for you, I'm just amazed at how positive and what everything that you're talking to us about today. But I have mentioned it a few times now that you got diagnosed at the age of 39. So what was it that prompted that?
Yeah, as I said, in terms of the experience around COVID and that, losing all of those things that I needed in terms of structure and novelty and finding ways to improve dopamine. This is way before I even knew this was a thing. And also, we had our first child, and parenthood had a huge impact on that as well, in terms of having to try and create routine during the day with the baby. Towards the end of 2020, so the COVID year, I had a really bad kind of mental health breakdown. I was struggling with work, struggling at home, and I was having therapy, and the therapist suggested ways to explore things to find calm and peace. And I said I really struggled to read, and I thought I was dyslexic. And so we went through this whole process, and she determined that because I could read some books and not others, it wasn't that. And she recommended I explore an ADHD diagnosis, and this is where kind of, you know, your performance in different environments and where there's interest and not interest can change your experience. But that was where the first signal was that actually you should explore a diagnosis. And it was a moment. I mean, I was a teacher myself for 5 or 6 years in secondary school, and I taught lots of ADHD children, all of whom I had a great connection with. Makes sense now. They were my peers. It just never occurred to me that was me, because I'm inattentive, and that's not the kind of the misconception of what ADHD looks like.
How did it make you feel? Because I know for me, I found out that I was neurodiverse around about 2-3 years ago, and I was angry. I was angry because I thought to myself, what would my schooling have been like if I had that support, especially when I was at university, especially when I did my 11 plus and I did amazing on it, but then the teachers were like, it's better for her to go to a high school rather than a grammar school because she's going to get that attention. And I was thinking, well, why am I different? Do you know what I mean? So for you, how did that make you feel when you got that diagnosis?
Yeah, I think initially it's relief. It's almost like there's an explanation for all of these things that you found difficult and that you struggled with. But then, anger really does come into it, and you kind of reflect back, you know, kind of why didn't parents identify this or teachers identify this? Why was it not kind of discovered earlier? And it is so frustrating, and it takes time to come past that. And for me, that's where I got into ADHD coaching, is because I had some coaching myself, and I discovered that I wasn't this kind of broken, fragmented person, that actually I've got lots of strengths, and it was just creating a positive environment and understanding myself to allow myself to thrive. Yeah.
Matthew, it's been such a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you so much. We'd love for you to come and be a part of the Bad Parents Club as well, so we can talk more about parenting, but also as well get your views and opinions on our subject. So thank you so much, Matthew Menzies, who set up ADHD Remapped in Northernden. As he's mentioned, he does offer coaching sessions there. So if that's something of interest to you, please do head over and put him into a search engine, and you'll be able to find out more info. It is time for us to say our goodbyes. I cannot believe we're at the end of the show.
Simone,
where's it gone?
I don't know.
Honestly, we have had such a brilliant show today, so thank you so much. Hayley, thank you for sharing that news. We're going to keep in close contact with you and find out more about your fostering journey. Helen, thank you for taking time out to sit down with me.
You're very welcome.
From your busy schedule.
You know, any time for you, Simone.
And after 3 o'clock, we have got some amazing film reviews.